Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to a Holy and Happy Hour where we mix, my two favorite things. A holy hour, a great conversation with fellow Catholics, and a happy hour. And today, for me, unfortunately, my drink is brought to you by Lindt and its ice water. But no matter, the episode's going to be great today. We're super excited to hear it. Don't forget to like and subscribe to support what we're doing here at the channel. You can also look at our Patreon. We have a free Patreon group to join. And if you feel called to support what we're doing, you guys can do that over there as well. But for now, I want to introduce my guest. This is Davide, and I'm going to go for Genoese Zerbi. Maybe.
Genoese Zerbi.
Oh man, I'm so close. I said it like a true American, but I see you got the drink for the happy hour.
Yes, indeed. When in Rome, you got to go
Yeah,
for it.
absolutely. When we were talking, you're like, it's a 7 hour time difference, and I don't know if I didn't even ask where you're from. I was just trying to focus on when we could record, and I was like, yeah,
Yeah,
where's he at? But that's so awesome, and I know we got to
yeah,
talk about it a little bit, but maybe I thought we'd just start with your kind of your story, who you are, where you're from, what you're doing now, and kind of go from there.
yeah. Sure. So, like you said, my name is Davide Genoese Zerbi, and I'm an Italian, as you might have guessed
Hmm.
from the name. But I was born in the United States, hence my very American accent. And so I was born and raised mostly in Virginia, but I've lived sort of like all over the world as
Hmm.
my family has moved around a fair bit. But again, I was like mostly in the Northern Virginia area. And, I went to school there. I went to George Mason University. I studied communications. But like I've always had a very strong attraction to the faith and especially to the sort of intellectual side and intellectual tradition of the faith. My father is actually a canon lawyer, and so
Oh.
as I was being raised, my parents were always able to like answer the questions or many of the questions that I had, and I was always out, like seeking those answers.
Hmm.
And so when I was in college, I went through a phase where I was like trying to become an atheist, but failing because I found, much to my disappointment, that the truth is a stubborn thing.
Hmm.
And so I got very good at, apologetics. I especially was dialoguing with a lot of like atheists and agnostics.
Hmm.
And then eventually I started my own podcast, which I can plug at the end. But,
Yeah.
as I was sort of like, working on this podcast, my dad made the offer or the suggestion to me that, I might consider studying in Rome. Because my dad was born in Italy, I have Italian citizenship. And so it was actually pretty easy for me to come here to Rome to study at the Pontifical University of St. Thomas Aquinas, which
Hmm.
is where I'm studying now. And so my end goal is to get what's called a licentiate, which is an ecclesiastical degree. It's a license to teach theology, which
Okay.
is it's the minimum credential necessary to teach at Catholic seminaries. I'm then
Mm.
probably going to get a doctorate. That's
Yeah.
several years out, so I'm going to decide in the moment. But
Mm.
that's sort of like my story and like how I came to be here in Rome.
Yeah.
I'm just finishing up my second year here at the Angelicum. It's 2 years of philosophy, and then next year I'm going to start 3 years of theology for my baccalaureate, and then there will be
Hmm.
2 more years of theology after that to
Nice.
study ecclesiology.
Okay. Nice. Now, do your classmates, teachers, spiritual directors, or anything, are they constantly like, "No, are you sure you don't want to be a priest?" I feel like they'd be constantly like, "Are you sure?"
I mean that there are a couple of so the Angelicum is basically a seminary. It's a seminary school.
Mm-hmm.
And so, most of my classmates are seminarians or
Mm-hmm.
religious.
Yeah.
And I have gotten a couple of people sort of like,
Mm-hmm.
poke fun at me for being, a single layman
Mm-hmm.
at the
Yeah.
Angelicum.
Yeah.
But, I've got this one actually, I've got one friend who's a Romanian Catholic. And
Mm-hmm.
so, because he's in the Eastern Church, he's been trying to convince me to just switch to like, the Romanian church, and then
Yeah.
I can get married and become a priest. And I'm just like, nah, I don't think that's where I'm called.
Yeah, yeah, that is really interesting. I know, yeah, talking before, you're saying you feel really called to be married, and that's really cool because I feel like some people. I know I became Catholic after I like. was engaged right before I got married, and so I always felt called in a way to marriage, and I knew I wanted to have a
Mhm.
wife. I always dreamed about having kids. I love this idea. Which, not saying if you're feeling that way, anyone watching, that you're necessarily called to marriage. Maybe you have those desires, but God still calls you to the priesthood. But I later on like just really discovered my love for the faith, and but I can be pretty indecisive, like even like getting in bed last night, my wife's like, did you lock the front door? I'm like, yeah. So are you sure? I'm like, no. I am now more unsure about that than ever before, and so I feel like God maybe blessed me with that a little bit of like, you know what, you're a pretty indecisive guy, so maybe we should set you up first. But no, I kid. But I that is cool that you have that discernment. Like it seems like it's pretty locked in. You know, feel like you know what God's
Yeah.
calling you to do. That's really great. It's awesome.
Yeah, and fortunately, my spiritual director has also been very good about like,
Hmm.
yeah, Davide, I don't think you're called to the priesthood. Like you
Hmm.
seem very much called to marriage.
Yeah.
And so like I feel pretty confident. Now, that said, of course, if the Lord calls me, I will go. I'm
Yeah.
ready to drop everything. I mean, I basically dropped everything in Virginia. I sold like 90% of my worldly possessions to
Yeah.
come over here to Italy. So it's not
Yeah.
like I'm not willing to, go
Yeah.
where the Lord leads, but
Yeah.
this is just where I think God wants me.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's crazy too. The only two people I know that have ever done something that drastic of like, yeah, I'm gonna sell everything. I'm moving clear across the world for you, but like across the country for my other friend. They're both
Right.
like either heading towards mission, like you are, like you want to be like teach and you want to go and help out at seminary and stuff. Then my other friend is a focus missionary, so she's out and serving, and she moved there. Felt called to move from Oklahoma to New York, and packed her stuff up and moved up there. Had no contact with anyone, no friends, no anything, and I was like, man, that's crazy. I don't. I feel like it'd be harder to make that decision if you didn't have like a good relationship with God. Like if you didn't have a good faith practice. I mean, I know there's
Yeah.
people that want like, I'm gonna move to LA because like it's crazy there, but I feel like it's
Hmm.
much easier when you have a purpose and like I'm gonna be here. I'm going to study in Rome and this great opportunity
Hmm.
because I want to be able to do my best to lead others to Christ in the future.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. Well, I'm glad you could join us for the series. The series has been great, and you'll be perfect for it. And you're actually tagged in it. So for anyone that doesn't know, behind the scenes, obviously, I'm trying to coordinate a whole bunch of different stuff. Me and Davide have actually been messaging for a while and have had scheduled and had to reschedule and reschedule. But I'm glad we finally got you on. And Hallie actually texted, or not texted me, but tagged you in the post that I made that said who would be good for this series, and she's like, "Oh man, this guy!" Like tagged you in it, and I was super excited. So this series has been 7 vices and their opposing virtues. So if anyone's watching, this is your first time seeing one of these episodes. We basically want to dive into the vice a little bit. Maybe some root causes. For some of them, we really dive into what does that vice even mean, but then kind of also jumping into some practicals at the end as well. Like what's the opposing virtue and how can we grow and continue to kind of rid ourselves of this vice or grow more in the virtue that opposes it. And so today we're going to be talking about like anger or wrath, as some would say. And I think for this one, and I'll probably like kick it to you on this one, Davide, is to
Yeah.
kind of kick it off because I know we don't need to necessarily define the term as much, but maybe there is kind of a defining factor to it as well because everyone's like, yeah, I mean, everybody gets angry, but maybe there's like a deeper meaning to it.
Yeah, so actually distinguishing anger from wrath
Yeah.
is actually really important
Hmm.
because anger, at least as far as we understand anger to mean, the emotional response that
Hmm.
might be affecting me, like the feeling of anger.
Hmm.
Emotions in and of themselves are never sinful.
Yeah.
Um, which is not to say that they can't be like informative about our, deeper spiritual disposition,
Yeah. Hmm.
but the sin is always in the will. And
Hmm.
so, it's actually a little bit inaccurate when people describe like the sin of anger,
Hmm.
because the anger itself is not sinful. The more
Hmm.
proper term is wrath
Yeah.
when we talk about this particular sin.
Gotcha.
And what wrath is it is actually a little bit hard to define in a theological way, just because one, there are so many translation
Hmm.
complications that get into it, where like the church fathers and church authorities are writing in Latin or Greek, and
Yeah.
so the words don't always translate quite perfectly. You'll see it translated as like vengeance or hatred or like, all sorts of various ways.
Mm-hmm.
But essentially what it is the assent of will to a disordered anger. And so when we speak of, vices such as wrath, we're always talking about a deficiency of the goodness or a distortion of something that is good.
Mm-hmm.
Because evil in and of itself doesn't exist on its own. It is a privation. It is an absence of goodness.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we talk about wrath versus anger, anger is the emotional response that we have. And that emotional response could be disordered or it could be properly ordered. Mm-hmm. And then within that, we can either give it the assent of our will or we can withhold the assent of our will towards that emotional response. Yeah. And so if the emotional response is well ordered, then we can give it the assent of our will. Whereas if the emotional response, if the anger is disordered, and it can be disordered in multiple ways, whether it's, anyway, it can be disordered in multiple ways, then we want to reject the assent of our will. We deny the assent of our will. And in that, there is no sin.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. And that makes a lot of sense. And I know my wife used to tell me, I used to say like, man, I got so angry today at work. And I feel like maybe I need to go to confession before mass. And she's like, well, I mean, what happened? Like, what were you thinking? What were you doing? And I was like, well, I mean, I just got angry. And it was early on in our relationship, but she was like, I mean, Jesus got angry. Jesus flipped tables and Jesus did stuff. And so that's kind of what I was hearing what you're saying. So in a disordered way, maybe it takes the form of harming others or like illing will or willing ill of others or something. Would that be considered an ordered way then? So like when Jesus flipped the tables because they had turned the church into a shop basically and were selling things and making money, is that what you're saying? I just want to make sure I'm kind of understanding it.
Yeah, again, we want to just distinguish the feeling of anger with the assent of the will or the actions that one takes as a result. Yeah. So like in the case of Jesus, it was absolutely just for him to get angry at the desecration of the temple and the turning it into a place of commerce. Mm-hmm. What made, I think, Jesus' actions in the temple justified were, at the very least in part, that he was the proper authority to enact justice in that circumstance. All right, because he is the Son of God, he is the Messiah, and at the end, that's his temple, it's his house. Mm-hmm. And so, like, we can talk about, like, because but the purpose of anger is, it is meant to drive us towards the pursuit of justice. And so the proper object of anger is justice. And so a well-ordered anger is an anger in response to and in proportion to an injustice that has been committed. And so when Jesus is, coming into the temple and he sees that his father's house has been, desecrated and, all of the, it's become a marketplace, he has a response of anger because an injustice has been committed against God here. And I can speak in my own life. I remember there was one time I watched somebody, they received communion on the hand and then immediately wiped their hand on their pants after they had just received. And that sort of like irreverence towards the sacred body of Christ, it made me angry. Yeah. And, it is actually good and pious to have that response. Now, if my response to that anger is to like run up, disrupt the liturgy and slap her across the face or something, obviously that would be one, to have a desire to do that would be disordered. Yeah. And to actually do it would be an assent of the will to that disordered desire. Gotcha. And so you have to consider, is this, has an injustice taken place? If not, then the anger is disordered. And you also have to answer the question of like, is the anger I'm feeling properly proportionate to the actual injustice that has taken place? Or in
Yeah.
other words,
Yeah.
is it not excessive? And
Gotcha.
once again, I do want to make it very clear that you can have disordered anger without sin.
Yeah.
Because, again, the sin is in the will. Now,
Hmm.
if you do find yourself feeling anger that is disordered, or really any emotion that's disordered,
Hmm.
that doesn't mean that, like, oh, like, because you're not morally culpable for it, that it's just, you should disregard it.
Yeah.
Because, like, how you tend is still very informative to you as you attempt to build virtue.
Hmm.
And so, for instance, if I find that, I am frequently getting angry at things that are not unjust, or I am getting excessively angry that is in
Hmm.
ways that are not proportionate to the injustice committed, then that tells me that, I have a predisposition actually opposed to the virtue.
Yeah.
Because the proper virtue is when you do the right thing quickly, easily, and joyfully,
Hmm.
as Aristotle put it. And so when I do the right thing, but
Hmm.
it's not quick, easy, and joyful,
Yeah.
or in other words, when I'm doing the right thing, but it's against sort of like a tendency that I have, then
Hmm.
that's called being self-controlled. And that's
Gotcha.
still a good thing, but it
Hmm.
does tell you that you have not really achieved the virtue yet. You don't have the habitual practice of that patience or whatever other virtue that you're talking about.
Yeah. Gotcha. Yeah, and I immediately thought like I'm always thinking of I'm such like a analogy type person, and
Mhm.
for anyone listening that's like that was a lot. When it comes to like the right person and like you're saying like Jesus was the right person to take care of that, to get angry, to flip that. That made me think like, okay, so it would be kind of like defending yourself, and like I mean some people would even say if you're gonna use deadly force or something, or if someone broke into your house, like you would be protecting your family. You could like you should defend your family. You are the person that needs to defend your family, especially as the man. But if
Mhm.
someone's like breaking into a building in downtown Tulsa, I shouldn't throw on a mask and be a vigilante and go and take care of it because now I'm not the right person for the for that. And it's like yeah, acting out in a disordered way, just as if like yeah, going up the mass and slapping the lady silly. It that 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 makes a lot of sense. And then and it also kind of brought up to I know a lot of the times people get really confused with same-sex attraction, and it seems like a lot of that was very similar of the the feeling of that or the inclination for that is not where the sin is, it's where the act is. And so it's unfortunate that I mean it's probably the enemy, but like people will push, and some on the Christian Catholic side will push saying like we don't like homosexual people because this and this, and it's like and then on the other side it's like just love us for us, but it's like there's this kind of middle ground that we're both missing. Like you guys think we're too far this way, we think you're too far that way, or certain people do, and there should be a middle ground. I think if people sat down and communicated more of like no, we love you as a person, as a son of God, but the inclination towards it's or the inclination towards it's not the sin, but you're acting on it, and that's the part we don't approve of. And I feel like maybe some
Right.
people would understand that a little better. And so that's obviously very. I feel like for me personally, my personal life, that's where it always comes to me. Is I've lately been working on. It's like when I start to feel that, it's like no, don't act on it. Like separate yourself, get yourself away. Don't just try to get
Right.
away from your kids right now. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really important point because, you know, the sin, like I said, is in the will. But and just as we say, like, people who have same-sex attractions, like, there's nothing sinful in having that attraction.
Hmm.
But the question is, like, what is the attraction ordered towards?
Yeah.
And, in the case of sexual attraction, like, it's ordered towards the family. It's ordered towards
Hmm.
procreation and
Yeah.
the union of the spouses. And so when you have an attraction towards, you know, one who in principle you cannot have a family with, be that someone of the same sex, or even certain like fetishes or
Hmm.
attractions to inanimate objects or things like that,
Yeah.
to
Hmm.
name an extreme.
Yeah.
We know that those attractions are disordered because they are not ordered towards the natural end of that proper desire. And
Yeah.
anger is the same way. You
Hmm.
can know, like, is this anger ordered towards the attaining justice in this circumstance?
Hmm.
Or am I just angry? Am I filled with a desire for just to make the other person suffer or
Hmm.
to lash out? Or
Yeah.
am I just angry for the sake of anger? Or am I angry for the sake of like a desire for justice?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And it kind of seems like, and it's been like this with all the episodes, that a lot of the vices, or maybe all of them, are like intertwined and they work together. It's like they're a team, like they're a team of each other. Because I feel like if anger was disorder and you're being angry towards someone in a way that wasn't good, it's probably because it's that vice is teaming up with another, that you're angry because you're prideful and that person embarrassed you in front of people, or you're envious of where that coworker got the job, or whatever. But I feel like they start to intertwine and work with each other.
Yeah, exactly. And again, like it's always a distortion of something that is good.
Hmm.
Like in the case of like, you're envious of your coworker because they got the promotion and you
Hmm.
didn't. It could be that you being passed over for that promotion was actually unjust. Maybe the coworker that
Mm,
got it because of nepotism, not because of actual merit, whereas you were the one who actually earned it.
yeah.
And so, like, that even in circumstances like that, it could be a just anger. But the question is, like, okay, like, what is the anger ordered towards? Is it
Yeah.
ordered towards, I want that person to hurt? Especially
Yeah.
if it's the coworker that was promoted rather than the person that made the unjust appointment.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, like, the proper, like, identifying the proper, basically location of the injustice is also an important
Yeah.
element there.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I guess that's starting to kind of open my eyes a little bit to why the opposing virtue would be patience. So, because I feel like maybe this would just take some time. You're starting to build up anger. It's like you need to step away, take some time, take a deep breath, and figure out like what's causing this anger, what's it directed towards, and it just takes some time. But if you are like me, sometimes my word for 2025 is mild. Like I just want to be a little bit more mellow. I don't want to act as in as many extremes. So whether it's excited or in the opposite, the angry or sad emotion. Um, and so patience has been a big thing for me. It's just focusing on like
Yeah.
slowing down, not reacting right away. And so I guess it makes sense why patience would be the opposing virtue.
Yeah. And it also just sort of plays into like our very identity as human beings. Because
Hmm.
at least in the Aristotelian Thomist tradition, like the definition of a human being is a rational animal.
Yeah.
And so, this is why Aristotle, said that the meaning, the purpose of human life is to live a life in accordance with reason and virtue. Because to him, those were the two things that really distinguish human beings from other animals. And so when we are
Hmm.
acting rationally and virtuously, we are acting most human. And
Hmm.
Aquinas takes that up. And of course, Aristotle didn't have the revelations of the gospel. And so now we can
Hmm.
sort of add on to that goal, the full life of reason and virtue. We can add on to that, the purpose of our lives is to know, love, and serve God. And we do that in
Hmm.
a supernatural way at the Mass, in our prayers, and in our worship of God. And we do that in a
Hmm.
natural way, by,
Hmm.
pursuing virtue and living in accordance with reason. Because when we,
Hmm.
are sort of enslaved to our emotions, when we are ruled by our passions, whether it's anger, lust, envy, whatever it is, when our
Hmm.
emotions are the ones guiding us rather than our reason, then we're like truly we're being less human. Because,
Yeah.
what makes us uniquely human is being rational and virtuous.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. No, that's a really good point. And I think I've heard someone recently, as soon as you brought up animals, I don't know why. I think it's probably because I had this conversation with someone today. I started thinking about Alex O'Connor, the famous atheist.
Yeah.
And his big thing is he's usually like not believing in God is usually based around animals. But
Mhm.
yeah, I don't even know. I don't. I feel like I was bringing that up for some reason, but anyway, um, yeah, I feel like the acting out of emotion and acting or versus acting out of reason is something that is sometimes hard to see. When you're the person acting out of the emotion and you go from one thing to the next, and you go hot to cold real fast. At least this is my experience. I feel like it took me a while to even understand, like my wife telling me that it seems like you got so angry about that so fast. It really wasn't that big a deal. Or man, you were like really like, it's not that big of a deal. It's okay. We'll be fine. You were like so sad. But I didn't see it. Like I was actually getting offended, feeling like I'm not like my feelings are valid or whatever. And so
Right. Yeah.
how would you think? I know obviously the patients that will come into this, but how would someone if they're maybe haven't identified with this yet, but maybe are struggling with it, how would they identify that they're struggling with this wrath?
Yeah.
Anger?
I mean, but before we get into that, I think
Yeah,
you
yeah.
did bring up an interesting point, is this tendency that we sort of like identify our emotions as almost like a part of who we are.
Hmm.
And there is a certain sense in which, that's the case.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like, there's this, especially nowadays, there's this sense of like, that because your emotions are not something you have direct control over,
Hmm.
that therefore, like, every emotion is valid, so to
Mm.
speak.
Yeah.
And it's valid in the sense that, like, it's an experience that you have, regardless of whether it is reasonable or well ordered or
Hmm.
not. But, that doesn't make it, frankly, reasonable or good.
Yeah.
And it also doesn't mean that we cannot exercise control over our emotions, because we,
Hmm.
we actually can.
Yeah.
And so, like, when you'll hear people say like, "Oh, if you can't accept me at my worst, you don't
Hmm.
deserve me at my best." And it's just like,
Yeah.
what they're saying is that, like, I want you to approve of my disordered emotions because
Hmm.
they're beyond my control. And it's just like,
Hmm.
no, no, no. You want to exercise discipline over your emotions to
Hmm.
bring them under the command of your reason.
Yeah.
And that does, I think, bring us quite well into the question that you asked, which is
Hmm.
like, okay, how do we know if we're struggling with this vice, with wrath?
Hmm.
And, I think that of all of the seven deadly sins, I think that wrath is actually one of the most obvious,
Hmm.
because it is one that is, I think, most likely to be visible to outsiders. And
Hmm.
it is, I think, one of the few vices it's one of the vices that I think has been least endorsed by modern society,
Yeah. Hmm.
because, there is still this understanding of like, okay, lashing out is not okay, you know?
Yeah. Hmm.
Um, and so I think that the way that we can identify, like, okay, is wrath something that I struggle with, is like, one, you can like ask your loved ones about it,
Hmm.
because wrath is such an almost always is such an externally visible,
Hmm.
um, or not wrath, sorry, because anger is so
Yeah.
externally
Yeah.
visible. People will be able to recognize, when you're angry, and they will be able to help guide you in discerning whether the anger was well ordered or not, whether it was justified
Hmm.
or not.
Hmm.
Another good way to sort of like habituate yourself to understand, okay, well, this is something that I struggle with, is to just sort of like try to take note of like times during the day when you experience like an inconvenience or
Hmm.
something that would normally make you upset. A
Hmm.
great example might be, how are you on your commute to work if you're in rush
Hmm.
hour?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, how do you feel in rush hour traffic?
Hmm.
Like, how do
Yeah.
you feel in situations where there are going to be things that bother you?
Hmm.
And ask yourself, am I bothered by an actual injustice being committed?
Hmm.
Like in the case of rush hour, it's probably reasonable to be upset at like certain things that you are losing out on as a result of this lost time. For
Yeah.
instance, like, oh, I wish I could spend more time with my family, but instead I have to spend an hour sitting in the car in traffic.
Yeah.
And it is natural to experience that loss to a certain extent.
Mm-hmm.
but at the same time to like, begin to get wrathful or to like blame the other motorists around you
Mm. Yeah.
is not reasonable. And so
Mm-hmm.
you have to look, okay, like, has an injustice been committed? Um, is my anger uh, directed at the actual injustice itself, or
Mm-hmm.
is it directed at innocent third parties?
Yeah.
And third, like, is the injustice that I've observed, is it proportionate to the outrage that I feel?
Mm. Yeah, yeah, those are good. I've also heard that people, and this actually be a good kind of goes right with what you're saying of asking the people around you, is that gossip tends to fall into this too. Of when you get angry at someone, sometimes what you want to do is go vent to your friends and tell them all about it. And I don't know if that falls into the same category like slander and well, what's the other word? I feel like there's another word I'm missing.
Calumny.
Yeah, calumny. I don't know if that all kind of falls under this same purview. I guess that kind of depends on your emotion towards the person. I guess it could also fall under envy if it's that coworker we were talking about, or fall under some. But if it
Yeah.
is that person cuts you off in traffic and all of a sudden you're cussing them out and then telling your boss at work, sorry, a dumb butt cut me off in traffic, then it's like, okay, yeah, that's maybe out of anger. But I don't know if those kind of fall under that. Someone told me that today. They're like, sometimes gossip can be a good sign that someone maybe struggles with anger or wrath.
Yeah, I mean, like, all of the various vices, they get along together great.
Yeah,
You
they're a
know,
good team.
yeah, exactly. All the vices get along.
Hmm.
They just don't get along with us.
Yeah.
And so, when you struggle with one vice, it is very likely to manifest in other ways as well. And like that's actually especially true of pride. This is why that
Hmm.
like pride is considered like
The root.
uh yeah, like the prince of all the vices.
Hmm.
Because it sort of like trickles down into everything else. Because if you are prideful, then you will commit any other sin,
Hmm.
almost as though it is your right to do
Yeah.
so. And
Yeah.
anger is a little bit similar,
Hmm.
where you will, or sorry, not anger, but wrath is very similar.
Yeah.
Even I make that mistake.
Yeah, you're good.
But yeah, so like you will see it in like envy or gossip, like and this is something that women are a little bit more prone to is reputation destruction. It
Hmm.
can be an aspect of wrath,
Yeah.
where
Hmm.
you will say false things about someone to destroy their reputation
Hmm.
in sort of like this desire to get vengeance for a real or perceived slight against you.
Yeah.
And so, I think that is very true, that, things like calumny, and if for anybody who doesn't know, let me see, detraction is when you say negative things about someone that are true, but that the other person did not have a need to know.
Hmm.
And calumny is when you say things that are destructive to a person's reputation that aren't true.
Hmm.
And so, specifically with like detraction, which is
Hmm.
often called just gossip,
Yeah.
is when you tarnish someone's reputation. It's one thing if like the person has a need to know the information.
Yeah.
Like, if I happen to know that somebody is like, has a really hard time controlling their temper and they apply for a babysitting job, I can go and let the parent of
Hmm.
the children know, hey, this person does struggle with, violent outbursts sometime. Take
Yeah.
that into account when discerning like who you put in charge of your children, because there's an actual need that the person
Yeah.
would have to have that information.
Yeah.
But if there's not an actual need, then people actually do have a they have a right to their reputation, and
Hmm.
to honestly to improve themselves and to to grow from their
Yeah.
reputation. And
Yeah.
so, yeah,
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. No, I was just gonna say that's great, and that I feel like sometimes it's the detraction one's hard because it's like like the person did this thing injustice to, or yeah, injustice to you, or they've done something. Maybe it's not even to you, but you know about, and someone needs to do something about it. But it's sometimes hard not to like say something to someone. But it's like a difference
right,
between if it's your coworker, and so you're going to your boss and was like, hey, I just want to let you know this person's doing this and I think it's going to affect their work, versus you going to your friends, like, man, today at work my coworker was like, my coworker's struggling with this or whatever and doing this, and they're like, oh, I don't need to know this, I can't do
Right.
anything
Yeah.
about it. But yeah, I have found that in the early stages of my faith, that was something for me that, before my Catholic phase, I was kind of in a stage of, I want, maybe not agnostic, but whatever you would call the person that's like, I think God exists, but I don't really care. And
Yeah.
before, so when I was in that stage, I was pretty bad at it. Like I would tell people like, man, I'm so angry today because so and so did this, and I'd be like telling a person that works for me, and it was about their coworker or something. And I was like, looking back now, I was like, man, I was so bad at that. It's like, hey, that's really unprofessional, but that person doesn't need to know. That's honestly just going to cause more problems. So, um,
Yeah.
that detraction is sometimes tough when it really is. It's like you feel like, I need to say something to somebody about this. And
Right.
unfortunately, the people you normally want to go to first, naturally, your friends, your wife, your coworkers, sometimes are not the right people to go to. And I feel
Yeah.
like I've grown in
I,
that a lot.
yeah. I mean, I will say that there is something to be said of like seeking genuine counsel.
Yeah.
Like if there's something that you're struggling with, like, like, oh, like this thing happened at work that like just really upset me,
Hmm.
like being able to like call somebody and like, talk to them
Hmm.
about what happened, like that there is value in that, and that's not necessarily sinful. But what I would
Hmm.
say is that like, can you like omit the names of the people
Yeah.
involved? Does the person you're talking to know the people involved and is likely to have their opinion or perspective of this other person tarnished by
Hmm.
what you're saying? And
Yeah.
so like, keeping that balance in mind
Hmm.
is I think that the key in that,
Yeah.
because there's a very big difference between gossip and counsel.
Yeah.
One
Hmm.
is good and actually helpful and spiritually fruitful,
Yeah.
especially if the other person can give you spiritual counseling in how you can grow and improve and
Hmm.
hopefully do better in the future.
Yeah.
That actually is a remedy to the to the anger and the difficulty.
Hmm.
Whereas if you gossip, if you're just like trying to trash the reputation of the other person,
Hmm.
then that is just going to make things worse, as you said.
Yeah. And then at the end, it's just gonna honestly most likely come back to bite you, and it's just gonna hurt your reputation. So as you're thinking you're telling people something and it's hurting someone else's reputation, maybe you're not doing it on purpose, but you kind of are, because you're sharing stuff you shouldn't be sharing. At the end of the day, when it comes out, and if your story is a little bit exaggerated, or these people are like further along in their faith or something, just a different mindset, they're gonna look at it and just be like, I don't think you should be telling me this, and maybe you need to talk to somebody
Yeah.
about this. But
It
yeah.
is sort of like the stereotype that whenever somebody says that they hate drama, usually they're the cause
Yeah.
of it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's like their favorite. There's which one is it? One of the shows I watch, it's either The Office or Parks and Rec. Oh no, it's The Office. Andy is like, I hate drama, and his girlfriend's like, no, you don't. You love it. He's like, I know. It's like, it's so funny. But yeah, and I what was it? I had something I was gonna go, but then I started talking about The Office, and my brain went blank.
So,
But
something about drama. The
yeah,
person who says I hate
um,
drama is usually the cause of it.
yeah, yeah. That's based on it, but that's okay. Yeah, no, this is all great stuff. This is something that I think that a lot of people it'll hit home with a lot of people. Now, when it comes to like patience being the key to, I remembered backtrack.
Yeah.
It reminded me of the story of Saint Therese, who had the sister in her convent who she hated, and she took
Yeah.
where you can always take everything took it straight to prayer and straight to God, and felt God calling her to like spend more time with her, like reach out to her, help her do stuff, and be around her more, and it was something that actually ended up helping her in the long run. Um, but it was something that she was a very good example of. She didn't go around the convent. Like obviously, religious life sometimes hard for people to relate with when they're lay people,
Mhm.
but they're people too. But she's a great example of like, take it to God, like take it to prayer, and maybe this is
Yeah.
a form of patience too, is like taking it to prayer before you react, and it's like, God, this really bothered me. Like, why was this bothering me? What should I do about it? And I think he'll be there.
Yeah.
He'll be there to counsel you in your prayer, and especially as you grow in that relationship with him. And that's why I kind of go into that next step is like, so why, like, if someone is listening and was like, so why would patience be the opposing virtue? I know we've touched on it a little bit, but maybe a little bit a deeper dive into that.
Yeah, so patience as the opposing virtue to wrath, it's once again important to remember that like wrath strictly like does not exist on its own. It only
Yeah.
exists as a privation of the goodness, right?
Mm.
And so, patience, and you could also describe mercy as being an opposing virtue
Yeah. Yeah.
to wrath as well.
Hmm.
And so like I actually think that patience, the translation is not exactly perfect.
Hmm.
Paciencia is very similar.
Hmm.
Obviously, like it sounds very similar, but it does have a little bit of a different connotation in the Latin.
Yeah.
But like strictly speaking, like what the patience means is really just the tempering of your emotions such that you are not unduly disturbed by things. And
Mm.
so and ultimately it does also come from an application of reason, of like
Hmm.
recognizing, the reality of the situation, like, okay, you're stuck in traffic. There is no injustice here. There's nothing I can do about it.
Hmm.
Let's just keep going.
Yeah.
And it actually also reminds me of the famous Serenity Prayer, which
Mm.
is actually a prayer that is used by like Alcoholics Anonymous and similar
Mm.
groups,
Hmm.
where they will say, "Lord, grant me the serenity to accept the things that I cannot change, the
Hmm.
courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to
Mm.
know the difference." And
Yeah.
so that quite frankly is like patience as
Hmm.
we describe as the opposite of wrath. Like that's patience in a nutshell.
Yeah.
Is, having the serenity to accept the things you cannot change, the courage to change the things you can, and the wisdom to know the difference.
Hmm.
And that comes from, an application of reason, but it can also be assisted by grace. Because
Yeah.
as we pursue the virtue of patience, there is the sort of like natural virtue that we can have, but also as a result of Jesus Christ and the new covenant and the sacraments and all of the things that the Lord gives us, we
Hmm.
have also a supernatural means to
Hmm.
obtain this virtue. And so it's not as though like, somebody who's like not Christian can't be virtuous. They can
Hmm.
have a natural virtue. Whereas we Christians have sort of supernatural aid that we can call upon
Hmm.
for our assistance and to grow in this virtue. And
Yeah.
so as we go about growing in patience, we can, one, make it a prayer. Like
Hmm.
when you're sitting in traffic and you're getting frustrated, you say a prayer.
Hmm.
That's how I calmed down when I was upset about the person I saw like wipe the
Hmm.
particles of the Eucharist off her hand.
Yeah.
I thought to myself, actually, I am a little bit more angry than is justified here,
Hmm.
because like that there's nothing I can do about it. Like
Yeah.
like I'm just a random guy,
Hmm.
and so I prayed a rosary, and at the end of my rosary, I felt better, and
Yeah.
so like we have that supernatural help,
Yeah.
but there's also just like things we can do on the natural level,
Hmm.
because and this is once again going back to Aristotle.
Hmm.
Aristotle sort of like sorted the different types of people into like six categories as far as like their relation to virtue and vice.
Hmm.
And so he had the on the two opposite ends, you have sort of like the angelic and the bestial, which
Okay.
no human being on earth. This is like the angels and the demons. All right,
Mm-hmm.
the angels are those that cannot but do the right thing. They
Hmm.
always do the right thing. They can't do the wrong thing.
Hmm.
The demons are so corrupted that they cannot but do the wrong thing.
Yeah.
And so the opposite of like there's the angels are so perfected they can't do the wrong thing. the demons are so corrupted that they can't do the right thing
Mm-hmm.
anymore. And then, you know, as you go in one layer, you have the virtuous, who
Mm-hmm.
are those who habitually do the right thing quickly, easily, and joyfully. And then on the other side, you have the vicious,
Mm-hmm.
who do the wrong thing quickly, easily, and joyfully. They
Mm-hmm.
do the wrong thing and they delight in having done the wrong thing.
Yeah.
And then in the middle, you have the self-controlled and the unself-controlled.
Mm-hmm.
And these are people who, you know, in the case of self-control, they do the right thing, but
Mm-hmm.
they don't delight in doing the right thing. It's like it's a struggle. They're fighting for it. And, you know, whereas in the case of the unself-controlled, they do the wrong thing, but once again, they have no delight in doing the wrong thing. They
Mm-hmm.
struggle and they fight against it. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think that most of us spend most of our lives in the middle two categories, the self-controlled and the
Yeah.
unself-controlled.
Yeah.
Or at least those are the things that we tend to focus on most.
Yeah.
But I think that most people have at least a few genuine virtues where they are genuinely in a state of virtue. Like
Mm-hmm.
sins that they just don't even occur to them, that they don't
Mm-hmm.
struggle with at all.
Yeah.
I spoke to one friend who talked about this person struggled with envy and described a situation where like they were really struggling with it. And I thought to myself, yeah, I've never had a temptation like that,
Mm-hmm.
you know? And of course I've got other temptations. I've got other
Yeah.
sins that I struggle with. There are areas of my life where I'm virtuous, self-controlled, and unself-controlled.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully none of my, no areas in my life where I am, vicious, properly
Mm-hmm.
speaking.
Yeah.
But, you know, that it, it's, it's important to, so the way Aristotle understood
Mm-hmm.
virtue and vice is every time we engage our will, every time we make an act of will, we are
Mm-hmm.
reinforcing habits.
Mm-hmm.
And so when someone is self-controlled and they are repeatedly doing the right thing over and over and over and over again,
Mm-hmm.
eventually they tend into virtuousness. Whereas someone who
Gotcha.
is unself-controlled, they're habituating themselves to do the wrong thing, and they will eventually tend into viciousness.
Gotcha. Yeah.
And so, you know, the way we attain virtue or
Mm-hmm.
viciousness is by doing the thing that we are tending towards.
Mm-hmm.
So when we repeatedly do the patient thing rather than the wrathful
Mm-hmm.
thing, that in and of itself, like every time you make that decision to do the patient thing and not the wrathful thing,
Mm-hmm.
that is building up the virtue of patience.
Yeah.
And so this is also part of the reason why, you know, Saint Therese of Lisieux actually like went out of her way to, you know, be extra nice and spend
Mm-hmm.
extra time with the sister that bothered her so much,
Yeah.
is because that actually is how you grow the virtue, is
Yeah.
you make the virtuous decision over and over and over again,
Yeah.
and as you do that, you grow in virtue.
Mm-hmm.
Now there's still some prudence that has to come into play there, because you should not
Mm-hmm.
deliberately place yourself into occasions of sin.
Yeah.
But it is more so about like recognizing when the small temptations and when the small things are coming
Mm-hmm.
up, because most of our time and energy gets spent on like the big things, and
Yeah. Yeah.
there's a reason for that.
Mm-hmm.
But if you sort of turn your attention towards like those smaller things, those smaller lines of thought,
Mm-hmm.
you can sort of like bring those sort of like easier fights into making them a habit. And
Mm-hmm.
as you sort of win the easier fights, then as you habituate yourself more and more, you can
Mm-hmm.
start to win the bigger and the bigger and the bigger fights.
Gotcha. Yeah, and that makes so much sense. Yeah, you don't want to like seek out the bad bad things. Like I'm gonna go put myself
Right.
in a
Yeah.
situation because you're just gonna set yourself up to possibly fail. But yeah, it makes a lot of sense, and then it also clarifies even more why God was telling Therese like go be around her, serve her, like help her out, like spend as much time
Yeah.
with her as you can. Especially in a convent, which it's like if you're getting along with most of the sisters and not one, I mean maybe there'd be a way that she could avoid her in general, but then you're not growing. I was a personal trainer for a long time, and for some reason I just kept thinking to myself of this time where I finally broke through in this big lift, and I was doing the same thing over and over again. I was doing my natural routine and everything, and my buddy was lifting next to me. He goes, "You want to try this?" And it was like way heavier than I had thought before. But I was like, "No,
Mhm.
no, no, I'm good. I can't do that." He's like, "You're almost doing what I'm doing now. Like, just try. Have you ever tried to do this?" It was like, I think I was doing 285 on squat, and he was trying 315. So it wasn't like some crazy jump, but I hadn't even like attempted to even do it. And the very first time, actually, probably the two or three times I tried it in the first few weeks, like I got down and I was like, "Yep, I am not going back up," and I failed at it. But yeah, but I feel like if I would have just avoided it altogether, I never would have been able to do it. But I eventually did get it, and I just kept practicing, and the more I attempted it, the more I was able to do it easier, and then I got to where I was doing 5 reps, and I was able to grow in that. I'm maybe not a perfect analogy, but feel like very similar
Right.
in thought to if I wouldn't have ever even tried it, if I wouldn't have even ever put myself in this position, if I would have just avoided it, I never would have conquered this goal. And so it makes a lot of sense that
Right. Yeah.
it's like, don't just avoid everything because you're never going to grow. I mean, that's where we grow in the uncomfortable, not the comfortable.
Yeah. I mean, like you should genuinely avoid near occasions of sin,
Yeah.
but that there's just sort of like a recognition of the fact that, the temptations are inescapable, that they're
Yeah.
going to come up,
Hmm.
no matter what we do. And so sort of like taking those opportunities, taking those temptations as opportunities to
Hmm.
grow in virtue is more so what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, that's awesome. So this is kind of the point in the segment where we kind of get to the practicals of like someone's listening and they think this is really them, and we've touched on them a little bit. So we can, if there's anything you want to add to it, but what are some things that someone should start with that, like, yes, this is me, wrath, anger. I feel myself thinking ill of people, talking ill behind of people behind people's backs. Like, where should I first start in trying to grow in patience?
Yeah, so when it comes to dealing with any problem, the first thing you need is sort of like you need a clear picture of like where you are, where you're starting out.
Hmm.
And I think that that's true with like any problem. I remember
Yeah.
I was once helping a friend sort out his like finances because like he wasn't really good with personal finance, and so he was
Hmm.
just sort of like, he'd get paid and the money would leave his account and he'd have no idea where it went.
Hmm.
And so I set him up with a program to just sort of like track his expenses over the course of 3 months. And I
Hmm.
told him just spend normally because I wanted to like get an idea of like, okay, we need to find out where your money is going before
Hmm.
we can find out how to get you in a better financial place.
Yeah.
And the same is true with regards like the pursuit of virtue, where like you
Hmm.
need to have a clear idea of where you are now in order to identify places to improve. And
Hmm.
so the first thing I think you need to do is you need to identify, like, again, those smaller things. Because
Yeah.
like you might be aware of that time that you flew off the handle and, I don't know, flipped a table or something like
Hmm.
that. But you might not be thinking about that time that you just, cussed somebody out while you were driving or flipped them off on the road,
Hmm. Hmm.
something like that that maybe wasn't a big deal. It's just like,
Hmm.
well, it all contributes. It's all cumulative,
Yeah.
because every time you make the impatient decision, every time you make the wrathful decision,
Hmm.
again, you're reinforcing the habit of the vice.
Yeah.
And so, making a sort of like a resolution to first just sort of like try to remind yourself throughout the day, I'm just going to sort of like observe myself.
Hmm.
I'm going to look at, okay, like, this made me angry and do some self-reflection at the end of the day. It's just like, okay, these are all the times I got angry. Maybe some of them were justified, maybe not, but, like this is actually what I experienced. And from that, you can get a much clearer idea of like, okay, like where actually am I? And
Hmm.
you can also start to look at, okay, where does the chain start?
Mm-hmm.
Because when it comes to like any sin, any vice, almost always it doesn't start at like the big thing that we're most concerned about.
Yeah,
They're not
absolutely.
concerned about the time that you like, insulted your wife and made her cry.
Mm-hmm.
Usually there were a bunch of little things that led up to that,
Yeah.
usually.
Yeah.
And so, like, recognizing, like, just saying, oh my gosh, I never want to speak to my wife like that again. That's not actually that helpful unless you actually look, okay, where is the anger actually coming from?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what led up to this? And how can you
Mm-hmm.
sort of, like, address it at the root? And also, like, how can you do the opposite thing of, like, if you struggle with, patience with regards to, like, oh, like, you hate standing in line, let
Mm-hmm.
somebody go ahead of you in line every day
Yeah.
as you
Yeah.
wait for coffee or something, or let
Mm-hmm.
somebody merge when you might not otherwise have merged. Like, do
Mm-hmm.
something kind for someone else that you wouldn't have otherwise done, especially if it's like inconvenient to you and is the type of thing that you normally would get upset about,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And so, because the more you start to do that, the more you start to, like, again, start with the little things and move your way up. You
Mm-hmm.
know, I think that that's actually a really good way of sort of like building that virtue, which is
Yeah.
not to say that you just ignore the big stuff. Obviously, you
Yeah.
want to go
Yeah.
after the big stuff too.
Yeah.
But, when you understand the fact that,
Mm-hmm.
these vices, that sin is not, a thing per se, but is the absence of goodness, you
Mm-hmm.
start to see how, oh, if I just pour goodness into this area of my life, then it wipes out the sin.
Mm. Yeah, that's great. It actually goes right into a conversation me and my wife were having last night of talking. I sometimes can come home from work and I'm the opposite. Like I have a terrible day. It was so stressful. I do fundraising for a living. Maybe I got a whole bunch of no's that day. I'm just like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
But I come home and see my kids, my wife, and I'm like, I'm a completely different person. I'm like, oh sweet, everything's better. But my wife was asking me if I have seen any changes in her because she said sometimes like I'm sorry, but I take it out on you. Like the kids have been tough all day, and then I get mad because you didn't remember to do something. But it's like she like was just telling me I wasn't getting mad at you. I I took it out on you, and I'm sorry. And so yeah, I love that. Is kind of
Right.
really identifying. I love that. Go like looking back, kind of an examination of your day to see where did it start? So did I wake up like this? Okay, where did it start yesterday? And maybe you do have to backtrack a few weeks to figure out like or just like to other things in your life to like what's causing this. Is it work? Is it a
Right.
person that is in my life right now? Is it like what is it? Because sometimes I think people don't even know. Like, they don't even know what it is. And yeah, like you were saying, like they think it's like they blew up on their wife and it's like, man, I just didn't have patience with my wife today. It's like, nah, I mean, yeah, you didn't, but you probably would have if you wouldn't have done A, B, and C. So yeah, that was
Right.
great.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That there's this very popular falsehood that Freud came up with, which is this idea that you have to, like, let out your anger in certain ways, that you have to, like, let out your desires, or else they'll, like, build up and then come out in more harmful ways. And of
Hmm.
course, we now know that that's just completely wrong. Freud got that, like, completely wrong,
Yeah.
because as it turns out, modern psychological research tends to show that actually Aristotle was right. That the more you feed into the anger, the more you let out your anger, the
Hmm.
more angry you make yourself.
Yeah.
And so, having that proper discipline of recognizing, like, okay, like, this makes me angry, this makes me angry, this makes me angry. I'm going to do the opposite of each of those things,
Hmm.
and, like, just to make myself more patient.
Yeah.
Like, if you, like, I'll give you an example from my own life,
Yeah.
where I once had a coworker that, I that would sometimes frustrate me, because he was the lead on the HVAC installation project that we would do,
Hmm.
and I was the secondary, and so he was my direct superior. And he would tell me to do things in ways that I didn't like to do, that were
Mm-hmm.
to me just much more inconvenient, that it didn't improve the performance of the system that we were installing.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't, to my mind, make the system look any nicer. Like, what is the point of doing it this way? It's just more work.
Mm-hmm.
And, like this was an occasional difficulty that I would have working with this one coworker.
Mm-hmm.
And, what I told myself is, I told myself, like, every time he asks you to do something, you say, yes, sir. All right. To just sort of like focus on that, like, obedience of like, you are not only going to, do as you're going to smile and, be excited to do whatever it is he asks you to do, no matter how pointless you think it is.
Mm-hmm.
you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
and as well as just sort of like fixing the mindset that I had of just sort of like, I'm getting paid the same regardless of which way I do the thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so, especially since I was making money hourly. So if my lead wants me to do it a certain way that's going to take me more time, well, the company's going to pay me more for that anyway, so who cares?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so just sort of like changing the mindset, and again, recognizing, okay, this person has authority over me. And so it's not actually an injustice that he's asking me to do something that to do something in a way that I'd rather not do it, that I'd rather do it a different way. And so just recognizing the fact that, okay, Davide, no injustice was committed here.
Mm-hmm.
Your anger is completely completely unjustified, and so you need to just focus on being as obedient as you possibly can.
Mm-hmm.
I actually found that very helpful.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I've found for myself, just in general, just trying to slow down my life, like trying not to go from meeting to meeting, have back to back, like 4 meetings in a day, followed by having to go back to the parish and help with the lunch thing. And then having Bible study that night and all this stuff, and kids doing different stuff. I've seen that. I feel like the most people that I've talked to that struggle with anger and stuff, if you ask them about their schedule, sometimes their life seems chaotic, and it's like, wow, like no wonder you're frustrated. You're also giving your life so many opportunities to throw a little pebble in your path, and when you throw that little pebble in your path, it's like you're riding one of those road bikes that the tiniest pebble just bends the wheel and just like throws you off.
Yeah.
But so I just been focusing like, man, let's just slow down. And I feel like life back then, like I just imagine like the disciples with Jesus, and like going from town to town, and just thinking about like how like those walks, like how long it would have been, and those how slow life would have been moving, and how just amazing that kind of life would have been. Obviously, we don't live in that time where we can just like not go to work and do that kind of stuff, but we do have control over our weekends and what we do in the evenings and stuff. And I think the more we can just slow down and everything, then it becomes a lot easier to be patient with things.
Yeah, authentic leisure is a human necessity. Like, we need to be able to like genuinely relax and have leisure time. And unfortunately, in modern society, like nobody knows how to have genuine leisure. It's like sitting on your couch and watching Netflix. Most of the time, that's not genuine leisure.
Mm-hmm.
All right, like you're just like, passing time. Mm-hmm. And for leisure, you need to actually allow your mind and your efforts to just sort of like unwind, and that can be done in a variety of ways. It can be done. Actually, a fantastic way to do it is to engage in genuine art. And so, like, and that could be watching a movie with genuine artistic value. It could be listening to classical music. It could be, just going to a church, and, like hopefully you have beautiful churches where you live. But, I'm a little bit spoiled in Rome that I can just pop into.
Just a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. I can pop over to St. Peter's for the afternoon. Mm-hmm. But, just like having something of like, something that is beautiful and good. Especially if it's just sort of like a very innocent hobby or pleasure, even something like stamp collecting, playing a board game, the very simple pleasures are oftentimes much more valuable to leisure than the sort of mindless entertainment that, we all enjoy. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with mindless
Yeah.
entertainment, but
Yeah.
it will not give you the decompression. It is not the leisure that you actually need.
Yeah, absolutely. Me and my wife are huge Marvel fans. And we have
Mhm.
found, like, when we sit there now, nowadays, Marvel's got a movie followed by a TV show that bridges the gap before the next movie, then another TV show. And so there's so
Right.
much. And we found, like, when we're watching these TV shows and there's like 7 episodes and we're watching them like once a week or something, we found like those type of like date nights, we're just started to feel like we weren't getting quality time together. So it's like, oh yeah, we're doing this type of leisure that society says is relaxing and a
Yeah.
great way to rest, but it's like we're not resting. We're
Like
definitely not getting quality time.
you feel tired afterwards, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And so then what we've done in the past is, and some of the best ways, and what we want to bring back is, we used to go like to the movie theater. It's our favorite place to go for the Marvel stuff anyway. But then afterwards, like, go get a drink or something and just sit at a bar with our phones up, having a drink, just like laughing and talking and stuff. And that's how we met, and that's how we
Yeah.
kicked off our relationship so well. Is there was a little pub right next to the fitness studio we worked at, and we would literally just pop over there, and this had this long bar, and at the very end there was like an L shape, like a one seat on the end and one on the very end of the side. And so we were actually able to sit like looking at each other at the bar, and it was just the best. Like, that was the kind of leisure we needed in those date nights and in those times.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, awesome. Well, we're gonna wrap this one up today. I definitely would love to have you back on those sometime, because I feel like we could probably do like a Pint to the Aquinas type like 3 hour episode, honestly.
Yeah, sure.
And I always tell people to just like to further look into this as well. Don't just stop here for like, now you've got all the information on wrath and patience that you need. Obviously, in an hour time, we can only get to so much, but we want to make sure we just provide you a great stepping stone. If this is something you guys feel like you're struggling with, please consult a priest. That's a great place to start, especially if you don't know where to go. Like, what should I be reading? What should I be listening to? Whatever. Consult a priest. It's always a great place to
Yeah.
start.
But
And now,
bonus points if the priest is a Dominican.
yeah, bonus points for
Yeah.
that. Absolutely. Uh, Before we go, though, I wanted to let you, yeah, where can they find you to feel like, man, I want to listen to this guy more? Like, where can I find his stuff? And I'll include in the
If you
links.
are unfortunate enough to have such a desire, which I'm not convinced it would be a well-ordered desire, but I can be found at Doctrine, Dogma, and Davide on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. I also have an Instagram under the same name at Doctrine, Dogma, and Davide. But I don't post super often on Instagram. YouTube and Spotify and Apple Podcasts are sort of my main platforms.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, I'll snag those links from you through email or something, so I can. So
Yeah,
if you're
sure.
watching this right now on my YouTube channel, you guys can check out his links and everything in the bio. So you guys don't forget to like and subscribe to, obviously, Davide's channel as well as this channel, to support what we're doing. We just want to spread the Catholic faith across YouTube, and hopefully plant seeds that'll blossom into great things across the world. Davide, thanks again for being on, and we will see you guys next week.
Yeah.